Welcome to American Pulse. Our theme today is Egypt Then and Now. Today we have a very honorable guest. Frank Wisner was the ambassador to Egypt between the years 1986 to 1991. He was the ambassador to Zambia, Philippines, and India. And actually once he was called one of the most supreme American diplomats. Welcome, Mr. Wisner.
Thank you. You flatter me.
Thank you. Mr. Wisner, I know that you had a you have a very extensive knowledge about Egypt, the Middle East, the whole 9 yards. I want to start asking you about your visit to Egypt at January 2011 when you were sent to speak with Mubarak. Would you like to talk to us about that?
Sure. I was sent at the instruction of the President, our President, obviously, President Obama, and I went over my instructions very carefully with the President. I was sent to engage President Mubarak at a moment of great tension in Egypt. The demonstrations were already in full swing in Tahrir Square. When I arrived in Cairo, I went directly to the President's palace and met the President there for the better part of an hour and a half, in which I conveyed my government's message. Now, I'm a diplomat, and I am taught as a diplomat to be very careful. The message I conveyed was President Obama's message, wasn't mine. So I have never talked about the details of that message, nor President Mubarak's response, which was, of course, also intended for President Obama. But I think I can say, in general terms, that the mission was about how Egypt would proceed under President Mubarak's presidency. He was still president. How the peace would be maintained, that is, no violence with the crowds. There were people demonstrating. There had already been a use of force, but force would have been extremely harmful to the Egyptian-American relationship. It was also about we had an important discussion about the future and how Egypt would evolve into a post-Mubarak period. We discussed that at some length. It was very clear to me at the time and to the President, I think to everyone, that a major change was occurring in Egypt, and the United States wanted to be supportive in that change, encouraging, make sure that it took place in a peaceful and sensible way. And I conveyed those messages, and then, of course, I went back to the American Embassy and returned, sent those messages that I'd received from President Mubarak back to my government.
How did you feel at that time of the situation being there at that prime time compared to the times you've been always to Egypt?
Well, of course, it was an amazing feeling. You came out of the airport and there was a tank in the middle of the street. You couldn't help but say, this is different. There was some signs of normality. Traffic was moving, but then you knew as well that in Tahrir Square there was already a substantial crowd gathered. It was a time of considerable anticipation. What was going to happen next? As I look back on that moment, I believe the United States was correct in wishing to encourage an orderly transition in Egypt from where President Mubarak had been to a democratic future. Anything else would have been irresponsible. An orderly transition on the road to democracy were precisely the words that Hillary Clinton used in a television interview the preceding Sunday. And that was the core of the message that I transmitted to the President. Was it going to work, given the heightened sensitivity, given the aroused popular emotion? That's hard to say. I tend to think that it was late in the day. But I also know whether it was going to succeed or not, it was the right message to deliver. It was a message and put the United States on the side of an evolution, not chaotic transition, but a carefully managed evolution that would put Egypt on the road to a democratic future. And that's where the United States ought to be.
Sure. After January 2011 revolution, Muslim Brotherhood came to the office and in power, and for some reason Egyptians had the feeling and the impression that the U.S. supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. How do you feel about that?
Well, I was not associated with the thinking in Washington in that period, so I can only give you my best sense, my best assessment. Sure. I believe, and I don't think I'm far from wrong in saying that the United States government attached a great deal of importance to legitimacy. In other words, this was a government that had been elected and had won an election that was internationally observed, and had come to power, therefore, through legitimate means. And that it ought to be given a chance to live within that mandate. That government had strayed beyond the mandate is my observation today. It's my own view, and I think many Egyptians share it. It had abused the confidence that the Egyptian people had given it, and therefore had prolonged the uncertainty in Egypt, the chaos, the difficulty. I was therefore not at all surprised when last year, in 2013, that large numbers of Egyptians went back on the street and insisted on a further revolutionary change.
Yes. Mr. Wisner, I understand that you had hand-delivered back in the 90s a check from USAID to Rosetta and for one of the NGOs in Egypt. And I think that was a big thing, and it was a big help. I would like you to elaborate on that, and I would like to know what happened during former President Morsi's time with the NGOs in Egypt, because we heard a lot of them were closed down, and so...
These are two quite different subjects. The actions I took in the 1990s, late 80s, 90s, I believe very deeply that the Egyptian-American relationship needed to have a cultural dimension. I was therefore very, very pleased to be able to promote the work of great American institutions in Egypt, the American University in Cairo, the Roosevelt House and its work in ancient Egyptian archaeology in Luxor, and the American Studies Center in Cairo. These are all terrific cultural contributions that brought our two countries together. There were also a number of Egyptian cultural institutions. I'm particularly proud as I look back on events like the one you mentioned. I'm also very proud of the work we did in the reconstruction of major monuments, Bain al-Qasrain. It was really being able to have the United States make a contribution to the dewatering and the preparation of the sites, and then the actual rebuilding of many of those fabulous buildings behind the ancient gates of the city of Cairo, medieval Cairo. So all of these were contributions not only in respect, out of respect for Egyptian history and culture, but part of the preservation of some of the great monuments which are part of the cultural heritage of all mankind. I'm pleased my country could do it, and that I was lucky enough to be the agent.
Great, and we're very thankful for it.
Well, you're kind to say that. I'm privileged to have been able to participate. And when I go to Egypt, I almost always go back to those Bain al-Qasrain walk from Bab Futuh, Bab Nasr to all the way down to where the tents are sold. In any case, that wasn't your only question. You asked a completely different question about the role of American NGOs. And there's been a lot of commentary. There were, in fact, judicial action taken. People were arrested, detained.
Yes.
All I can say to you is that, and the American government did support, through financial assistance, the work of a number of those institutions, and several of them I know personally, outstanding institutions. The International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, were all in Egypt aiming at creating the sinews of a democratic society by training programs and discussion groups. None of this was about the harming Egypt or the molestation of Egypt. It was really more about the providing some of the experience that we'd acquired to Egyptians who were entering the political sphere. Now, all of these problems occurred in a time of very heightened sensitivity. And I'd like to think that we can get beyond that, and there will be a proper law that will define the role of non-governmental organizations, that the habits of cooperation will recommence. It's very important, because relationships between countries do not simply rest on governments,
Yes.
nor even on businesses. But the fabric of civil society needs to be able to communicate both ways. There are Americans who want to make a contribution to Egypt. I feel the same. And so therefore, it needs to be orderly, it needs to be legally done, and so we have to find a way forward out of the misunderstandings of the past and into a better place where civil society can link up with civil society.
Sure. There was always this mutual respect and love, and I think it's still there, but there's a little bit of a distortion between the Egyptians and the Americans.
Yes, unfortunately.
So, I mean, you know, I was born Egyptian. I migrated out here, and I was lucky to be American citizen, and I'm very thankful for America, but I love my home country. And I'm very sad to see the tension.
Yeah.
What do you think we should do, act positively and take forward steps to, forget about the past and whatever happened in the last couple of years and just do the right thing and come back to this mutual respect?
I certainly share that sentiment. I believe that a strong and prosperous Egypt is good for the United States. And I believe the United States, as a strong partner for Egypt, is good for Egypt.
Yes.
Both are true. And I also recognize, as you have pointed out, that in the last several years there's been a lot of tension, which has resulted from the political transitions and political changes that have occurred in Egypt. It is time to get the relationship back on track. I'm very convinced at the level the aid program is being assumed. United States extremely talented ambassador wide expected diplomatic that the Secretary of State is needed on the case, and he working literally as a way who this mayor and there's a confrontation is and Hamas this role want Egypt states together to bring peace to trouble. Be a part. My own view is that you choose the path. This is fact. The real challenge to define the future. I see future in trees. First tradition of political cooperation that the United States enjoyed and should interest in both sides enjoy. Sure. Plenty of to peace Egypt in Egypt maintain of cooperation to issue water to Nile, to food and through manage crises in Libya, to end on. We are seeing a civil war of imagined demands. Syria as well as violent threat stability in Iraq. These all areas the United States and Egypt to get quickly. Interest each other in the interest in the overall ability. So it's time on those issues. There's a most important issue. That's economy. Egypt strong. Cannot stable the United States without economy. We have an in East economy. Helps loss the last years being gained some increase rates and the heavy to new president in Egypt and his minister. It also is so responsible the United States and the international commission. Work will give Egypt to resume growth in the economy that is suitable to the Egyptians. So those who has the path with those that have face and the creating create side of it. Was objective to great ship survive since the 1990s.
Question was no the break. We're back. So was a lot of questions. I need him and terms of then giving licenses. What do you see future of Egypt now?
Well, I start in confident about Egypt by Egypt. It is a big nation. Been extraordinary. This great nation world. Egypt cannot its stability. It will be great, and will make major contribution humanization of that of convention. The period right now, and all ends have difficult situations in Egypt to institute in place and recover economic provide for citizens and move be whole responsibility the region and good on the states. It is all that it to those it's know that the privilege of working with mission somebody's and convince sure but not easy. The deeply have to have and that will spill in look cyanide is a example. Not motion around in the world all lives the economy of it consumes it to every single some very quick very barely believe that to grow to have number government get its own responsibility and more than earns then it lives in aid which is inflation encouraging I believe government to handle on the present spending very important. It's hard substitutes since the 1920s. Are these going people? Egypt has substitutes. Those substitutes going to the going people. Is spend daily subsidy best spend money, or should not be spending. It's infrastructure. It's water, on the infrastructure, universities, hospitals, it's public education. It's both have both, but that have to resource. You choose the path of spending daily calculation, or you your belt and spend on more enforcements will give addition. Economic. Now that transition is very end job. Front of the president, more of minister of his very job. Don't envy the difficult call for ordinary origins. Sense that take measures leisurely. But Egypt give to the future. It's government. I believe Egypt will for an open that those constraints on Egyptian investment, internal investment, are diminished, that the state allow much greater play for the private sector, where business can start, where micro business can start, where Egyptians can find their own ways without government support or oversight or excessive meddling to build enterprises that are profitable. From the corner merchant to the bigger factory, and that Egypt needs to have an investment regime that invites capital from abroad, Egyptian capital outside the country, other Arab capital from the West, to be invested in productive activities in Egypt. Got to have a investment-friendly regime. So that's the other issue, how to create growth. And I believe growth comes through a particular concentration on the contributions the private sector can make.
Based on the roadmap that the Egyptians have put together since June 30th, do you see things are moving in the right direction?
I do, personally. I see all the formal steps taking place as predicted, and Egypt is to be congratulated. All Egyptians have played a role. Those who were in dissidence is a different matter, but Egyptians have by and large played a role in designing a constitution, conducting elections, picking a new president, now headed down the road to selecting a new parliament. These are all important steps, and they're recognized as important. But I would argue a step further. It still remains to be seen what the content of these moves will be, what the content of Egypt's political life will be. Will it be a political life dominated by security concerns, or will it be dominated by the promise of the new constitution, which is very different than Egypt's past? The president shares much greater power with the prime minister and the government. Yes. There are very strict conditions for the protection of the freedom of speech, for the free practice of established religions. The normal freedoms that Egyptians should want and have every right to want are guaranteed in this constitution. So you want more than just the letter, but you want the spirit of a new age to take over. We have a constitution. The words of the Constitution are quite clear. Now they have to be given real political support, real meaning. Will Egypt be a nation that is dominated by its security needs and situation, or will it become, as I would hope, a nation that respects the new dispositions of the Constitution, a Constitution in which the President and the Prime Minister share power, where Parliament has a greater role, where the essential liberties are guaranteed, the freedom of speech, the practice of established religion, the freedom of enterprise. These are all in the Constitution that have to be given life. Now, I recognize, going from where we are today in Egypt, where there is violence,
yes,
there is opposition to the government,
yes,
to have a much calmer society where people can compete under the rules of the new Constitution, there is a transitional period. But you want that transition to be as short as possible. Yes, Egypt must be stable, no question. Yes, it must respect law and order, no question. But to move from that onto a more open and participatory life, that's what I believe Egypt will be about, and what will make her great, is she will set an example for all of the Arab world and show the rest of the world that Egypt can set a pace towards a fair, participatory, open, modern democracy.
Mm-hmm. There's a challenge going on now in Egypt with the opposition. You had shed the light on it, and I feel that the government has a great deal of pressure, whether, going ahead and implying every single rule out there and get people in trouble, or to let go and then, what they should do. It's a very tough situation.
Yes, life's about balances. It isn't about one or the other, but it's about finding the right balance. And the balance doesn't always exist at the same place because the weights shift. Egypt was deeply chaotic. Violence was occurring. People were being killed. Acts of terror were being committed, not only in the Sinai, but in Cairo and in some of the great cities. That was unacceptable.
Big time.
That must be dealt with. Egypt has had enough of chaos. It wants stability. Without stability, you can't have economic progress or political freedom. I have no question at all. But you want to strain at the edge of moving beyond a national security environment to a participatory democratic environment. And that will take leadership. It will take the active participation of the president and the great institutions of the state to move Egypt in that direction. Egypt needs to be dynamic, to take advantage of its democratic future. And that means pushing. And I also believe, and I'll add one final point,
please,
that in a more open system, room will be found for those who disagree with the current order.
As long as
but there has to be within a framework of law and order and of peace and of stability. But then the opening up of Egypt, where all her citizens can participate, has got to be in everybody's interest.
Sure. I'll turn a little bit away from this, and I'd like to ask you about when you spoke at the memorial service for Mr. Richard Holbrooke. He was known to be another diplomat who knew about tough negotiations, and I would like to learn more about this man and your relationship to him.
Well, there have been great American diplomats, and I've had the privilege of knowing many of them, past generations and present. There was no greater in my generation than Richard Holbrooke. He was a man of fantastic energy, determination, sensitivity to the plight of those who are downtrodden, very sensitive to the role of the United States in the world, proud of that role, determined to make that role a constructive one, a man who brooked no opposition and sometimes stepped on people's toes when he was doing it. But his spirit was toward a better world and America helping to build that world. he also enjoyed Egypt greatly.
Great.
He visited me. He and I were friends for over 40 years. But he visited me in Cairo when I was ambassador. We visited the city, and he was fascinated by its sights and its history. We went to the Sinai. We climbed to the top of Mount Sinai on Easter morning after stopping in the holy monastery and its church, and spending the night in that monastery. We then went and saw the work of the American soldiers who were participating in maintaining the Egyptian-Israel peace by acting as a peace maintenance force, the multinational force organization. And he loved all that. Until his last days, he would talk to me about his time in Egypt. He had many friends, many Egyptian friends, foreign ministers, ambassadors, all of whose company he enjoyed greatly. When he was ambassador to the UN, when he was in private life, he maintained those Egyptian friendships. So he was a real man of the world, but Egypt was very much on his mind. He liked Egypt a lot.
Very nice to hear. About what's going on now in the Middle East. Egypt has presented a ceasefire plan that was turned down by Hamas. What do you think of that?
Well, I regret the offer of a ceasefire was turned down. Look at the suffering that's going on, the destruction, wanton destruction. Is this good for the people of Gaza? I can't believe it is. I believe that the sooner that the wisdom of Egypt, the diplomatic framework that Egypt is proposing, gets some traction, the two sides agree to it, the better. I'm not going to sit here and blame anybody. There are always reasons that I'm sitting in New York and they're sitting on the front lines. But I know that this violence is really unacceptable. The loss and the suffering is ghastly. And I'm pleased that Egypt is back playing the role she's playing.
Sure. Do you think there's anything else can Egypt offer at this point after presenting this plan that was turned down?
Well, I am certain that Egyptian diplomats, leaders have got their sleeves rolled up and they're trying to think of every angle that will provide assurance to both sides to desist from further violence. I won't try to second guess them. But I know that we make a terrible mistake if we think this is what the big story is. This is a violent, tragic story. Yes. But a ceasefire in Gaza is not going to decide what is going on in the rest of the region. Think of what we're facing. Libya, on your western border. There was a struggle between factional gangs yesterday for the control of the airport. Huge military actions taking place, large military actions taking place in Yemen that begin to threaten the capital there. And then think for a moment about what's going on in Syria and Iraq. And think about the threats to Jordan and Lebanon. The entire region of the Mashriq is in flames. Yes. And political action is urgently required to set the stage where military action may be necessary to expel violent extremists like Daesh from northwestern Iraq, and to begin to move Syria back on a road to reconciliation between the Free Syrians, called the Free Syrians, and the government. These are all big challenges. They're essentially political, but there's a military component.
You had opposed the American administration to go into war in Iraq back in the days when it happened. Were you prophesizing of what's going to happen nowadays?
Well, I think you exaggerate my views about the past. I certainly believe the United States, if it was going to go into Iraq, had to turn the country back over to the Iraqi people very quickly and get ourselves out of the equation and not allow our presence to further exacerbate the issues that were there. But that's history. Now we're facing a really serious matter. Will Iraq survive as a nation? Will it be dismembered? Will a radical Islamic force, Daesh, control the majority of Sunni inhabited Iraq? Will Kurdistan go free and become independent? What about the rest of Iraq under those circumstances? This is frightening, for the dissolution, the end of sovereign, unified Iraq is a threat to all of us. Now, what can we do? There is only one way forward that I know, and that is the formation of a government in Baghdad that brings together the political leaders of the Kurds, of the Sunni and the Shia, and behind a political program that means all Iraqis will be treated fairly. Perhaps in each area there will be a large measure of autonomy, but everyone will be treated equally. And behind that, a determined military campaign to wipe out the dissidents of Daesh. Cannot survive. A stable democratic Iraq and Daesh are antithetical. This is going to require more than just the work of the Iraqi people. It's going to require support from the outside, from the United States, from Iran, from Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, Turkey. All of us have got to get together to help the Iraqis get control of their situation and maintain their country. So there's a big problem ahead of us and real work to be done. But it starts with a political decision that really only Iraqis can take, the formation of a national unity government and effort.
Mr. Wisner, you are an advisory board member, or at least from what I know, for the Partnership of Secure America.
Yes.
What's the role of the organization and...
The Partnership for Secure America is a wonderful organization. It tries to identify the major issues that the nation faces and then draft positions that bridge the gap between Democrats on the one hand and Republicans on the other, and find a common position between those two, and then rally thoughtful Americans behind those positions so that our leaders in the Congress and the political parties can see that Americans who want a progressive, problem-solving society have actually got ideas. And these ideas are good ideas, and they are consensus ideas. Most democracies function when there is a consensus. You can't impose your will on the other guy. You've got to find a way to make an agreement. And that's the work that the Partnership for Secure America tries to accomplish.
You think Egypt can benefit from a similar program?
Good point. Not in quite the same way, but Egypt doesn't have two great political parties. But could it benefit from...
concept.
Yeah, the core concept.
Yes.
Of private Egyptians identifying national issues, discussing them among themselves, publishing their conclusions, bringing those conclusions to government, where government can decide, is this a base for practical policy or not? I think there's terrific reason to have such institutions in Egypt.
I would like to know about your experience in Egypt and a couple of the Arabic words that you know in Egypt in Arabic.
Well, that's a hard task. I'm embarrassed when I'm with Egyptian friends at the poor quality of my Arabic.
No, I think you speak it very well, and I heard you've been in the coffee shops in Egypt a lot with Egyptians, mingling with Egyptians.
You're kind. You're kind with the fondest memories. But I have enjoyed, first and foremost, the friendship and hospitality of the Egyptian people. Second, I've enjoyed the great beauty, the cultural fascination of your land through all its ages, from ancient Egypt through its Islamic civilization to its popular cultural styles. I have been in Tanta when there were Sufi demonstrations. I have been in Sayyidina Hussein in Cairo at other moments of religious concern. I've visited Al-Azhar. I've walked the great monuments, seen many of your beautiful medieval mosques and architectural triumphs, unmatched anywhere in the world. And of course, I've been to Upper Egypt, to the Said, where you're from, and seen some of the great relics of the Egyptian, of ancient Egypt. I've seen the Roman period and many demonstrations of what happened in the Greco-Roman, Byzantine periods.
Lots of monasteries as well.
The Christian contributions to Egyptian culture. Egypt's a rich country. You draw so much from so many different areas. When I look around and I see radicals who say there's only one tradition, I really feel sorry for them. How poor Egypt would be if it didn't have all of these currents that flowed that make her a great and rich country. So I look forward to continuing my association with Egypt, of going back, of eating fatir mishaltin, of sitting and having fasih at Sharm el-Nassim, of being able to go down into the marketplaces and find my favorite dishes, the kosheri and the
very impressive, very impressive.
And top it off with a good dessert of Ali.
Wow.
All of these things are dreams of mine to be able to get back to. But meanwhile, let me say to you and to all your viewers my very best wishes. These are going to be difficult years. I'd like to see the American-Egyptian relationship return to its full strength, that we make a contribution alongside Egyptians as they deal with their problems at home and in the region. And it will be my privilege to try to play whatever role I can in this great and noble enterprise. So thank you so much, and pleased to have been with you.
Thank you very much for having you, and I'm sure we will have the honor to have you in the future again.
Inshallah.
Thank you. Bye-bye, inshallah.